At the sound of the flying clipper ship bells, Pan American World Airways presents...
I suppose we're what you'd call typical Americans. Love hamburgers, chocolate sodas, and travel. Most of all, travel. So we decided to investigate the different kinds of planes flying to Europe, because that's where we wanted to go.
Now then, here we have a model of the double-deck Clipper, the last word in luxury flying. As you can see, the passenger compartments are on two levels, which make possible to move out a bit, stretch your legs. You can go downstairs to the lounge, or you can go upstairs to your seat or sleeper. The top deck here is the regular seating space, which is more than enough room for 61 people. These cabins over here are the dressing rooms. And down here, we have the lounge and bar, where you can have a friendly chat with your fellow passengers.
That convinced us. So a month later, we took the double-decked Clipper. The upper deck was comfortable, but to stretch our legs, we went downstairs, where we met some interesting people. Among them, Irving Hartley, a film producer.
Well, after those instructions, Irving, I ought to be able to win an Academy Award.
Listen, darling, I'll be perfectly satisfied if you get 2 or 3 shots in focus.
Oh.
Well, we'll run into each other in London, and if you need any help, you just sing out.
Oh, thank you.
Say, you know we ought to be landing about this time. By golly, there's England down there now.
Isn't that amazing?
Yes, it's true what they say. It's quicker by Clipper. Yes, there were the green-turfed fields of England, the gentle hills where men had flourished for over 2,000 years. We had the feeling that we were not strangers, that in a way we were coming home, because every town and valley is packed with history that's our common legacy. The Houses of Parliament, Westminster Abbey, the Thames, the Victoria Embankment, St. Paul, all are names as familiar to us as Times Square or the Golden Gate. On that first morning, as we walked out onto the balcony of our West End hotel, we were a little overcome by the fact that we were in London at all. Yesterday, New York's East Side, today, London's West End. It's a magic world, and the panorama that spread before us was magic too. We decided to let the day take care of itself and travel about with no special aim. We wanted first to see Piccadilly Circus, said to be the center of the world. But even the center of London is difficult to find without a map, so we consulted the one given us on the Pan American Clipper. It always amuses me that in the heart of London there should be a statue to the god of love. The last place on earth I'd expect to find it. But there he is, Eros, looking down on swirling traffic, concrete, and lots of plate glass. The flower girl is still there, but the old houses are gone. And unless you remember that Scott and Byron and Johnson lived in Piccadilly, you might miss feeling the surge of history under the modern current of life. I said east, and she said west. Well, anyhow, this was a good chance to see if the London bobbies lived up to their reputation for politeness.
You seem to be a bit confused. Can I help you?
Well, I'm sure you can, officer.
Officer, we want to go to St. Paul's Cathedral, and my husband says it's that way, and I'm sure it's that way. Isn't that right? And we want to go to the Law Courts and the Bank of England and Buckingham Palace and Westminster Abbey and the Tower of London.
No, madam, you haven't got a helicopter, have you?
No.
If you cross the road, take the third turning on the right-hand side, it will bring you to the Travel Association. They'll be able to help you.
Oh, thanks
Thank you
so
very
much.
Trafalgar Square was our first stop. We left the National Gallery till later. And then to St. Paul's. It's still standing, even though everything around it was demolished. Somehow, surrounded by emptiness, it breathes the greatness of England even more than before. Nothing left now but a ground pattern of rectangles with a wall jutting up here and there. and then down the Mall to Buckingham Palace, for everyone wants to see the changing of the guards at least once. England is one of the few countries in the world where soldiers still wear elaborate dress uniforms. I've heard that if you search for it, you can find, worn as a regular dress, some costume of nearly every period from the reign of Henry VII to that of Queen Victoria. Whoever designed these fur hats had never heard the word functional, but the originator of this stomping of the feet called square bashing must have had a practical motive and a foot warmer. Westminster Abbey is England's Valhalla. The enmities of 20 generations lie buried here, Elizabeth beside Mary, whom she beheaded. Remember Beaumont's poem? Think how many royal bones sleep within this heap of stones. Here they lie, had realms and lands, who now want strength to stir their hands. The Houses of Parliament are near the Abbey, and architecturally they harmonize perfectly, even though they weren't built till 1834. Of course, you recognize Tower Bridge. And on the other side of the Thames, the Tower of London, fortress, royal palace, state prison, and now a barracks and museum. Imagine, it's been in continuous occupation for over 8.5 centuries. A long catalogue of famous people have died here. Anne Boleyn, Catherine Howard, Sir Walter Raleigh, Lady Jane Grey. At this very gate, Traitor's Gate it's called, Anne Boleyn fell on her knees and cried to God for help. This is the very spot where many of the great were beheaded. I suppose if any place on earth is haunted, this is it. The yeoman warders of the Tower still wear their famous livery, including the symbols of the Tudor rose, the Scotch thistle, and the Welsh leek. We cornered one of them and learned a little more about the history of the Tower.
Who was it who actually built this tower?
Well, there are some would have you think that it was Julius Caesar who built the tower. But it was William the Conqueror who built it. And he used parts of the old Roman wall which was built by Julius Caesar.
It's had a fascinating history, hasn't it?
Yes, they say the stones were put together with lime mixed with blood. Well, there has been enough blood spilled here for that.
What else has it been used for besides the prison?
It has been a palace and even a zoo. In one of these towers, they kept wild lions. Yes, and some poor human souls have been caged up in there until they chopped their heads off in the block or broke their bones in the wheel. They beheaded the Earl of Essex, Sir Walter Raleigh, Lady Jane Grey, and Queen Anne Boleyn. I've seen Anne Boleyn carrying her head underneath her arm, and poor King Henry VI, who was stabbed while he was at prayer. They come at night, they do. Their names are here on the walls. Aye, and their ghosts too. It was here, in this room, they say, that the little princes were murdered. Smothered they were, right here as they lay in bed.
If you're tired of stone and history, there are the perfect trees and green velvet of London's many parks. St. James's is the most beautiful park in London, and therefore one of the great sights of the world, for an English park is something special. Neither artificial, like a French park, nor completely natural, but a compromise between the two. To a Londoner, it's his paradise lost in town. If St. James's is the most beautiful, Hyde Park is the most many-sided. The corner near the Marble Arch is London's Forum. From a dozen little rostrums, torrents of words are hurled at an audience which seems to gather for the sole purpose of baiting the speaker. It's an impressive spectacle, this tolerance of the crowd for any opinion, exclusively and typically English. We ran into Irving Hartley again in Hyde Park. We'd seen him once before, and he'd found London a very difficult place to photograph because it looks its best in a low, soft light. He wanted to capture some of the misty beauty Whistler saw there, but unfortunately, color film isn't up to it yet. We went with him to see Trooping the Colors, the annual ceremony on the King's birthday. King George, in a fur hat, rode in an open carriage with Princess Elizabeth beside him on horseback. After a good deal of parading at fast tempo, the men go into a slow march that's unusually impressive. We were beginning to understand that no one ever can know London thoroughly, for it means something different to everyone. It's full of unbelievable variety, absolutely modern, absolutely medieval, absolutely 18th century, or absolutely middle-class Victorian, according to your point of view. And so the days passed, and the time had come when we must leave London and go to see the countryside. Irving came along to get a shot of our departure that Donnie wanted for her film record. We smiled for the camera's sake, but we weren't as happy as we looked because London grows on you, and we hated to leave. Many people begin by disliking it, but no one can really know London without loving it. As Dr. Johnson declared, when a man is tired of London, he is tired of life, for there is in London all that life can afford. We got another view of Big Ben and Westminster Palace, better known as the Houses of Parliament, rising in their grandeur. A short and pleasant boat ride takes you to Hampton Court. William III wanted to make Hampton Court his Versailles, but fortunately he failed, and the beautiful Tudor buildings with their fantastic chimneys were left intact. If you bone up a bit on history, you'll enjoy England a lot more. Imagine Henry VIII's greedy ears perk up as Wolsey explains that this clock records not only the time of day, but the phases of the moon, the tides, the seasons, and perhaps even the progress of the solar system through space. We reach back even farther into the past at Windsor, for it is said that it was in a castle on this hill that King Arthur established his Round Table. Today, the modern knights who play in the river are likely to be from Eton, for that famous public school is just across the Thames. As we in America understand the term, Eton is not public at all, but thoroughly private for the sons of gentlemen. The buildings are old and beautiful and so venerable that their Eton jackets and silk hats seem most appropriate. It was this playing field of which the Duke of Wellington spoke when he said, "The Battle of Waterloo was won here." Oxford University is on the Charvel River, and punting on the Char is a delightful way to absorb the atmosphere. Teaching began here 1,000 years ago. Think of that. The scholars of that day would be astonished at such things as films and airplanes, but they might be even more astonished to know that their inspiration has lived on unchanged. Rudeness is rare in England. Almost everyone's polite and obliging. One of the students, knowing we were strangers, volunteered to take us about.
How do you like planting on the Charwell?
Well, it was certainly a new experience for us.
But it was marvelous. I just loved it.
You've certainly chosen a lovely day for it.
It's been beautiful.
We enjoyed our stay at the Boars Hill Hotel, which was typical of the many charming inns throughout England. After a delicious lunch, David took us about in his MG. Everyone talks about the beauty of Oxford, but Yeats put it best when he said, "So beautiful one expects the people to sing instead of speaking." We shivered a bit at the thought of the great number of famous men who had walked through Devil's Passage. Roger Bacon, Matthew Arnold, John Henry Newman, Shelley, Moore, Addison, Gibbon.
This is New College. It's still called that. That was built about 1380. We have another endowment here,
Some time ago, one of your Rhodes scholars from the southern states left a fund for juleps.
It must have been Kentucky.
Once every year, they're served to everyone in the college hall. But I can't say that I like them myself. Perhaps that's because we Britishers don't really know how to make them properly.
I wish I had more time. I'd make you a real Kentucky mint julep, and I know you'd like that. But I think we'd better push on. You see, we're going up to Stratford.
We said goodbye to our student friend, and not without qualms, took to our bikes. England is the perfect country for cycling. No form of travel can compare with it in a place where something interesting is to be found on every side lane, and where glamour inns and tea lawns are common wayside lures. Anyone who visits a foreign country after having become familiar with its painters is struck with astonishment at seeing how much the land resembles the pictures of it. The whole country looks like a great park, extremely civilized and man-made. There are no high mountains and no extensive plains, just hills of varying height. The light and weather are forever changing, and nature is human and hospitable. Great Kew. English names are a delight for two reasons. They're quaint and they're familiar like an old song. Well, the most ardent foe of quaintness would soften if he saw this Cotswold village. The cottages, roofed with thatch, are built about a green, which is the center of communal life. Age has touched the houses with a gentle caress, which adds a great deal to their charm. We learned later that one writer had called Great Kew the most beautiful village in the world, and I'm inclined to agree with him. In olden times, the green was the place for festivals and for carrying out justice. Donnie spied the stocks and decided it was time to put me in my place. Apart from the birds, which sang lustily, the whole place seemed half asleep. But in a wayside inn, you always get a cheerful greeting. We'd always dreamed of going to Stratford, so we saved that till last. Stratford was just an old market town of no consequence until the alderman's son set the world on fire. The roof sagged with the use of centuries, and the shutters on its oldest house looked like a drop-leaf table. We were surprised to learn that Shakespeare was born in such an elegant house. He went to school in this guild hall. No doubt it was here that he first saw the strolling players who fired his imagination. Not far away is Anne Hathaway's cottage, a cottage of 14 rooms, no less. It probably hasn't changed much since Shakespeare came courting up this very path, he hardly 18 and Anne 26. They were married for more than 30 years when Shakespeare died in 1616. He was laid to rest here in Holy Trinity. The Avon flows on down to the Memorial Theater, where an excellent cast performs his plays. Next trip we'll arrange it differently, but now we had to head back to Piccadilly and the Pan American office to pick up our mail.
One sees such interesting people at the Pan American offices.
You're right, dear. One does meet interesting people in the Pan Am offices.
Hello, Lee. How are you?
Fine, how are you?
And Donnie, how are you? Say, since I last saw you two, I've been all over Belgium.
Belgium, Irving. Tell us all about it. We may be going there ourselves. Is it true what they say about Brussels?
I don't know what they say about it, but I say it's one of my favorite places.
Then you're the man we've been looking for. Give us a blow-by-blow description.
Oh, I like everything about both Luxembourg and Belgium. My schedule took me first to Luxembourg, the pearl of all Europe for beauty. Actually, at first glance, it looks like a miniature. And then you realize that this is real. Luxembourg is a tiny country, very hilly, very picturesque. It has been patiently coddled, coaxed, trimmed, manicured, barbered, and upholstered until from end to end it looks like somebody's private estate. or else like a made-to-order composition for a painter. The Grand Duchy of Luxembourg has its share of ruined castles, and I confess a weakness for ruins. Not so much because they're photogenic as because they stimulate me to try to reconstruct the past. The castle at Vianden dates from the 13th century. Think what prayers and scandal, what sorrow and laughter those walls have heard. Of course, ruins are wonderful to photograph, too. The architectural details at Vianden were of several periods, showing how it had grown through the centuries. Yes, sir, I repeat with emphasis. Luxembourg is one of the most pictorial countries I've ever seen. I urge you not to miss it. You ask about Brussels. Well, Brussels is to me one of the most delightful capitals in all Europe. It has a mood of optimism that acts like a tonic. The Grand Place, the center of old Brussels, is dominated by the town hall, or Hotel de Ville, as they call it. It was begun in 1410, and it's in a rich Gothic architecture that makes it the pride of the Low Countries. In the square, they held splendid tournaments in the 15th century. Age is so dark in the buildings that it's impossible to get a good light reading for color photography. But I found the sculpture and architectural details irresistible. Ancient guild houses surround the square. There's the Hall of Archers, the grease makers, the coopers, the skippers, and so on. And, of course, there's always the people. The people of Brussels, and of all Belgium, for that matter, are energetic, progressive, optimistic. This was one of the most pleasant surprises to me. I'd never known any Belgians before. Sand painting is an art found in Belgium that I'd never seen before. The artist works with colored sands that he sifts out between his thumb and forefinger with the most remarkable skill. The sketch he did for me took about 30 minutes. But when they're working on something more ambitious that they want to preserve, they spend 5 or 6 weeks. The sand can be fixed with some sort of glue size. The pièce de résistance of all Belgium for me was Bruges. From the top of the belfry, you look down on what is practically a medieval city. It's sometimes called Bruges-la-Mort, the dead city, because it was once a thriving commercial center. That was before Columbus discovered America. Today, everything is still and peaceful, and Bruges, no longer of commercial importance, is the picturesque capital of West Flanders. It's also called the Venice of the North because of its network of canals. At every turn, there's something to remind you of the blight which fell on the city when its trade was lost due to the silting up of the river Zwin, its waterway to the sea. The faded colors, the time-worn brickwork, the indescribable look of decay. It's all very sad and pathetic, and yet strangely beautiful. Today, artists come to wander about the narrow streets with their curious step-gabled houses and old buildings, which bear such eloquent testimony to the ruin that overtook what was once a powerful and opulent city. Art flourished as the town grew richer, and the Van Eycks, Memling, David, and many other great painters were attracted by its splendor. There's an excellent Memling museum where many of the massed works are preserved. It's interesting to see that even though most of the subjects are biblical, Memling used costumes and backgrounds contemporary to his time. Everyone has heard of Bruges lace. The lace makers are, to me, more interesting than their product. They are usually sweet little old ladies with faces like a portrait by Holbein. It's remarkable that their withered hands can still travel so fast. If Bruges is the highlight of Belgium, the procession of the Holy Blood is the highlight of Bruges. Every window, every inch of pavement is packed by the devout and curious. Pious visitors from all parts of Europe are there. First, you see Adam and Eve driven from the Garden of Eden. The first hour of the procession shows key scenes from the Old and New Testament. Some are tableaus, some are actually acted out.
Ja, dat beweerde ik. Maar wat hadden we nog meer getuigen is nodig om het zelf uit te leggen. Mocht niet gewoon dat hij de zoon van de levende God was. Wat zou hij de zoon van de God zijn?
Each year, the monk who takes the part of Christ does it as a form of penance. This cross is solid wood and so heavy that the monk fainted 17 times in the 2 hours of the procession. That which impressed me most was the vivid force of the whole atmosphere. I thought it wasn't a pageant, a spectacle that I was watching, but an act of worship in which the actors and the spectators were as one. The climax of the whole ceremony is the passing of the shrine of the Holy Blood, borne by 2 bishops. At the end, the participants and the people assemble before the chapel of the Holy Blood. It was all very moving, a fitting climax to my visit.
Well, that sounds too good to miss. Say, can we fly from here to Brussels by Clipper?
Well, of course. How about that?
Why, surely. It's only an hour away. You can fly from London to Brussels and then go down to Paris. From there, there's a wonderful trip you can take down through the Chateau country. End up at Nice on the Riviera. Spend some time there, and then go home the southern route. Marseille, Barcelona, Lisbon, Santa Maria, and home that way.
How would you like that?
Need you ask? Irving, you've certainly sold us on Belgium.
Good. Well, I must be running along.
We'll tell you how we liked you when we see you at home. Goodbye for now.
Goodbye.
Happy flying.
It always is. So long.
Bye.
We followed Irving's advice, and after a marvelous week on the Riviera, left Nice and flew the southern route home.
high over the Atlantic, dreaming about the weeks ahead. Mickey was taking advantage of his opportunity to chew a lot of free gum. The stewardess said this plane would be in Vienna by lunchtime. Kay and I decided that if it could be done this quickly, this easily, we'd do it every year.
Harold Abordol, Fobrian Pan American World Airways, Jock Ethel Cade. Attention arrival of flight number 100 from New York City. Thank you.
When we landed at Shannon, a reporter was interviewing the passengers.
Pardon me, ma'am. Are you staying over in Ireland?
Oh, no, I must study on to Vienna. I've not seen my people in 6 years.
Oh, I see. Well, perhaps next year. Thank you very much. Good morning.
Good morning.
Are you staying over in Ireland at all?
Yes, we're going to be here for several days.
That's fine. Perhaps once you've had a taste of it, you'll make it several weeks.
Oh, I'm afraid that's not possible this time.
Well, that's a pity. Because speaking without prejudice, it's one of the grandest countries in the world.
After a super breakfast at the airport, we hired a little car and drove north to Cong in County Mayo. Ashford Castle is one of several old castles that have recently been turned into hotels. It was once a hunting lodge for the Guinness family, the makers of the national beverage of Ireland. Only in our dreams did we ever think someday we'd live in a real castle. The grounds are beautiful, and there's everything to do here. Golf, tennis, sailing, and some of the best trout fishing in the world. Fishermen can come back with a dozen or so of the biggest trout he's ever caught. All through the western section of Ireland, home industries flourish. The local folks do the whole job, from raising the sheep to dyeing the yarn and weaving the cloth. We drove to one quaint old thatch cottage where several girls of the neighborhood had gathered together to produce some of the prettiest homespun we've ever seen. The colors are gorgeous. Kay wanted to buy everything in sight. We did buy several pieces. Lucky for us, Pan American has increased the baggage allowance. In some districts, the Gaelic language is spoken. We stopped for a moment to listen to a Gaelic lullaby. I can't describe the grandeur of the cliffs of Moher. Sheer rock rises 700 feet out of the sea. A fisherman there told us he brought a family of 12 on milk, potatoes, and fish.
Aye, it's a hard life, sure. It's the very devil of a life when the young children are grown. But we can't starve with the sea full of fish and the rock with mussels as big as your fist. And we can't freeze either, and plenty of fine turf in the bog. Aye, I'm thinking that some in the big cities have a harder life, and they with money in the bank.
We drove on through the valley of the Shannon, past hundreds of tiny cottages with chimneys pouring out the incense of Ireland, the sweet smell of burning turf. The houses are whitewashed stone, and some are so small that a child might think them the houses of fairies. By the leisurely pace of life, we knew we were in a foreign country, all right, but there's no language problem. I can see why people get sentimental about Ireland. We got a great kick out of the villages and the philosophy of the people. In one village, we saw a group of men thatching a cottage roof. The owner was quite eloquent when Kay asked him how long it took to thatch a roof.
Well, you see, 'tis this way. Several neighbours get busy on the one house so that they'll get it finished that day. And you know, 'tis a light-hearted kind of work. One man sitting up on the roof with a leg hanging over each side, and he roping down the thatch so that it won't be blown away. And down below, several of the neighbours helping him. They'll be joking with him, and that's the way we live. A little bit of this and a little bit of that kind of work. But glory be, isn't that better than doing the same thing over and over again? Like I seen a man in Galway once, and he doing nothing but sawing wood in the mill, day in and day out. And sure, what sort of a life is that for any man?
Over here, it stays light till nearly 11 during the summer. So after supper, we cycled out to an old Franciscan friary, built in 1474. All Ireland is dotted with such ruins. Next on our list were the lakes of Killarney. The scenery is really something to look at. As the Irish say, the beat of it can't be found anywhere. The little town of Killarney is clean, attractive, and has great charm. Among the people we met was one delightful old fellow who loved Americans.
All the Americans, we all love the Americans here. They get wonderful reception. Everybody in Ireland likes America because the Americans are always very nice to Ireland, you know, and they believe in freedom. We all love to see them coming here, for we have great hotels and all that for them. We expect them to be coming here in thousands. I'm sure they'll be delighted to come here. We'll give them a great welcome and a great ovation to them all.
The beautiful gardens and unusual plants make a botanist's paradise. Remember, Stan, you suggested taking a trip into the Kerry country? Well, we did. The one we enjoyed most was the trip through the Gap of Dunloe and back, which took all day. You ride horseback through the Gap, 10 long miles. One look at us, and they recommended the boarding platform. There was a cottage along the way where we stopped to have a cup of tea and buy a few souvenirs. After a picnic lunch, we returned through the 3 blue lakes of Killarney. Shooting the rapids was a great thrill to Mickey. I was a little excited myself. At this point, we decided to stay a few days longer. The reporter was right. We had really fallen in love with Ireland and its friendly people. We went to Cork because Mickey insisted on kissing the Blarney Stone. Robert Gibbing says Cork is the loveliest city in the world. And anybody that doesn't agree either was not born there or is prejudiced. The streets are wide. The quays are clean. The bridges are noble. And always in the background, we could hear the music of the Shandon bells, about which the famous poem was written. So we went to see them. Kay asked one of the children playing on the church grounds to recite the poem for us.
With deep affection and recollection, I often think of the Shandon bells, whose sound so wild would in days of childhood sing round my crib their magic spells. On this I ponder where'er I wander, and thus grow fonder, sweet Cork, of thee, with thy bells of Shandon that sound so grand on the pleasant waters of the River Lee.
5 miles from Cork, in the middle of a pretty park, are the ruins of Blarney Castle. The first question Mickey asked when we entered the grounds was, "Where's the Blarney Stone?"
The Blarney Stone? Do you want to kiss the Blarney Stone? Well, there it is, right up there. That stone held by those 2 bars. That's the Blarney Stone.
So we climbed to the roof of the castle, and Mickey sat down with his back to the 150-foot drop, while the guide held his feet. He was lowered over the edge, and after much wriggling, managed to kiss the base of the stone. We haven't seen any change in his speech yet. All the signs are written in both Gaelic and English. We headed for the plains of Tipperary to see the Rock of Cashel. It's a great mass of rock, a naturalist, right on the plains of Tipperary. In about the year 450, St. Patrick came here, and at this very cross, converted the king. Kings lived on the Rock of Cashel for centuries, both before and after the time of St. Patrick, and one of them, Cormac McCarthy, built a chapel. It's an impressive piece of architecture with its high stone roof and Norman decoration. They told us it's the oldest stone structure in the country. There is nothing else quite like it in the whole world. As we entered the cathedral, it gave us a queer feeling to think that St. Patrick and Henry II and Edward Bruce had all walked on this very same ground. There were fragments of sculpture all over the place. Mickey was fascinated by this interesting old figure. From the balcony, we looked out, and for miles around could see the plains of Tipperary, the birthplace of many famous racehorses. So we extended our stay, and the next day drove to the Ballacastine Stud Farm. Kay asked the stud groom why this section of Ireland is so famous for horse breeding. He said it was a limestone plain and the best bone-making country in the world. Nothing looks less like a racehorse than a fluffy foal. We saw a string of beautiful yearlings. The stud groom looked at them with the expression of a mother.
They're going to the yearling sales at Newmarket, and a better batch of yearlings has never left the country. Poor little devils, they don't know what's up. This is the first time they've been on the roads. You see that filly? She's by the Phoenix, and she's worth £10,000 if she's worth a penny. I reckon there's £70,000 worth of horse flesh in front of us this morning.
One of the stallions, the Phoenix he is called, is valued at £60,000, about $250,000. He's a magnificent beast. One of the loveliest places in Ireland is the little valley of Glendalough. A tall, round tower rises above the trees. One of those towers peculiar to Ireland and built nearly 1,000 years ago as a belfry and refuge from the Danes. The entrance was built high so that those who sought refuge could pull up the ladder after them and feel secure from attack. If you can put your arms around the Celtic cross and touch your fingers, you get your wish. Kay wished that we could return to Ireland next year. It looks like a date. Nearby is St. Kevin's Kitchen, where St. Kevin lived after he retired from the world. It has the same type stone roof found on other Celtic buildings. Later, we had lunch on the banks of the lake, and the boatman fed us a little blarney.
Tell me, how deep's that lake out there?
Well, now, the lake, sir. Well, now, that lake is so deep that when my sister went bathing there a short while back, she sank. And we never heard a word from her until we got a letter from Liverpool telling us to send on some dry clothing. That's how deep it is, sir.
We couldn't leave Ireland without visiting Dublin. What an aristocrat among cities. They say O'Connell Street is the widest main street in the world. Could be. Anyhow, its shops are fun to browse in, and its people, as elsewhere in Ireland, are courteous and friendly. Almost everyone in Ireland rides a bicycle. At least, that's the way it looked during the noon rush on O'Connell Street. We hired a jaunting car and had a hilarious time listening to the Jarvie. The older residential sections with their red brick Georgian mansions reminded us of similar sections in our own cities. The distinctive doors are really something to behold. The Jarvie story about his master and the donkey was the best yet.
You see that house over there? Well, that house belongs to me old master, Dennis McCarthy. Oh, many's the night I was in and out of that house when he been. There was nights that man never went to bed at all. Will I ever forget the morning that he thought he saw the devil coming up that way? Look at the two horns on him, says he. And he out with his gun and he shot him. And the dad wasn't his own donkey.
Trinity College, right in the heart of Dublin, is the leading educational institution of Ireland. It was founded by Queen Elizabeth in 1591. The quadrangle is paved with cobblestones, worn smooth by 350 years of steps. Be sure to tell everyone to visit the library at Trinity, where they will see one of the most precious books in existence, the famous Book of Kells. In about 600 AD, an unknown Irish monk in an abbey at Kells was copying the Gospels in illuminated writing. He was one of the world's greatest artists, enriching his book with 1,000 beauties of intricate designs. He poured into it all the power of his imagination. When you turn the pages, you turn back the centuries to Irish saints and ancient Irish culture. And don't miss the Abbey Theater, birthplace of so many famous plays and players. The building is not impressive, but the performances are something to be remembered. The actors in Synge's Riders to the Sea and The Well of the Saints, which we saw notch. For anyone interested in sports, Dublin has plenty to offer. We saw horse races at Phoenix Park, and exciting dog races in the evening. You know, dog racing and breeding is almost as popular as horse racing. And we saw an exciting hurley game at Croke Park. Hurley, similar to our field hockey, is the national game of Ireland. There are several excellent golf courses. My game could be improved. And we saw some superb riding and jumping at the spring show. In other words, we had plenty of fresh air and fun. Our friends insisted we should join a fox hunt. So a weekend was arranged with the master of the Tipperary hunt. We were out early because we didn't want to miss anything. This was a lawn meet. The huntsmen assembled at the home of the master about 11 a.m. The whip came up with the hounds. 70 of them, or 35 couple, as they say. The master of the Gallant Tips is recognized as one of the greatest horsewomen in Ireland. She knew every hound by name. There were about 24 riders. They explained that this was a small meet, for it was late in the season. Sometimes there are as many as 100 riders. We followed on foot. There were quite a few of us because fox hunting in Ireland is a community sport. For everyone who actually follows hounds, there are 100 who have a sporting interest. The master and the whip moved on to a thick laurel covert, and into this, the hounds were thrown. Soon the hounds started to fox, and pandemonium broke loose. The hounds really made with the noise, or as the Irish say, gave great tongue. Mickey got a great kick out of the fact that children also hunt. There are almost as many children as grown-ups. Stan, this is the life. I could spend several months a year on this Emerald Isle and enjoy every minute of it. The hounds killed in the open and the fox's tail, or the brush, was presented to the first lady up. Yesterday we attended a feis, or festival. Feishes are held all over Ireland to perpetuate the early culture. Gaelic music and poetry and dancing. Several contests go on at the same time, and at the end of the day, prizes are awarded the winners. That's it. This morning we set the Clipper, and in a few minutes we'll be in London. Believe me, we had one grand time in Ireland.
This story began one morning with the arrival of 2 letters. One for John Erickson, that's me with the mouthful of toast, and one to my wife, Mary, who was getting through that breakfast without eating the toast. Now, my letter was from my cousin Stig in Sweden, and Mary's was from her Aunt Clara in Norway, both urging us to visit them that summer. It seemed a strange coincidence until it occurred to me that Mary had plotted something behind my back. And then Mary said it. Why, we'd planned a vacation that year, and flying Pan American Airways, we could be in Stockholm in less than 24 hours. Obviously, my wife had been investigating on her own, but I must admit the same idea had been running through my mind. I guess both our minds had been made up for months. When we first caught sight of the double-deck Pan American Clipper that we were to board, Mary said, "Well, we finally made it." This was to be her first flight, but she dreamed of it for so long that everything seemed quite familiar. We felt at home, too, in the solid comfort of the Clipper's interior. We settled down into wide, roomy seats, and our vacation had begun before we even took off. Once in the air, I flipped open Pan American's guidebook to the world. I stretched out in that man-sized sleeperette seat and began to dream up the final touches to the three-part vacation that we'd planned: Denmark, Norway, and Sweden. Just about the time we were feeling hungry, our stewardess turned up with a steak dinner prepared by Maxime's of Paris and served sizzling hot from the Clipper's kitchen. Even Mary had to admit that she couldn't have done better. And to prove that we were really on vacation, a glass of vintage champagne. Downstairs in the double-deckers lounge, we spent the last part of the evening chatting with our fellow passengers, comparing itineraries and boasting just a little about our own plans. And here Mary remarked that PAA had even provided a substitute for my midnight trip to the icebox. We lingered over that last little midnight snack, while on the upper deck our steward was making up the wide bed-sized berths in which we would spend the night. After a good night's sleep, we changed at London to Pan American's special Scandinavian flight. And before we knew it, we were over Stockholm. Traveling any other way, our whole trip would have taken more than a week of our vacation. But we had flown to the capital of Sweden in less than 24 hours. This was the first time we'd ever seen Stockholm. And as our plane started in for a landing, I could tell that Mary was getting more excited every minute. My cousins, Stig and Ingrid Svensson, were to meet us at the airport. And Mary, her eyes glued to the window, kept saying, "Look, there they are. I think I see them."
And there they were. The Svenssons had been urging us to make this trip for years, and now, well, I could hardly believe we were really there. It was just a year since the Svenssons had visited us in America, and Ingrid and I had talked about this trip. I didn't think there was a chance of it then, but now Ingrid whispered in my ear, "You see, John's not so stubborn after all." Ingrid and I were off on a shopping tour early the next morning. And there was Stockholm, exactly as I'd expected it, bristling with two-wheelers. We'd arranged to meet John and Stig at lunchtime on the observation platform of the Katarina Tower. But by the time we finished our shopping and dodged through the noonday traffic, we were out of breath and at least half an hour late for our appointment. I could just imagine John up there getting hungrier and madder by the minute and grumbling to himself the way he does whenever I'm late. Women, women, he complains. They never seem to worry about the time. As it turned out, the view from the tower was so magnificent that the men hadn't even noticed how late we were. To my surprise, there were no complaints at all. Now I saw for the first time the breathtaking color and beauty that the Pan American folder described. The city stretched out beneath us like, quote, some incredible sparkling jewel, unquote. If ever there was a perfect setting for a restaurant, here it was, right on top of a tower high above the city. While we were waiting for lunch, I couldn't resist showing off the beautiful Swedish glass that I'd bought that morning. And of course, I had to boast about the money I'd saved. Then lunch was served, and I forgot all about my shopping and the beautiful view and everything but that wonderful smorgasbord. John's supposed to be the big eater in our family. I'm the one who watches my waistline. But after one look at that assortment of food, I'm afraid I forgot about it. cold meats and fish, salads and cheese, and that was only a starter.
After lunch that day, Mary and I walked along the water's edge to the town hall, famous for its blend of modern simplicity with traditional elegance. That was a combination that we came to expect as we got to know Stockholm better. Everything modern and up-to-date, but always with a sort of blend of tradition and grace, the warmth and beauty of the old world. Take the ceramic shop that we visited. Here, every design is carefully applied by the artist's brush. Everything is shaped by hand and by the centuries of tradition that go to make the craftsman's skill. The result is the world's most beautiful modern pottery, and one more addition to the Eriksson collection. I must admit it was hard to resist. The same traditional skill goes into Swedish glassmaking, and their glass, of course, is world famous. Having bought some for ourselves, we were particularly interested in a demonstration of the ancient hand-blowing techniques. I was doubly impressed with the skill that goes into this when I got a chance to handle the blowing tube myself. For some reason, I always think these things are going to be easy, and it always ends with Mary saying she told me so. In Stockholm, you get the impression that everyone owns a bicycle and everyone owns a boat. The Svenssons had promised to finish off our visit with a tour of the city in their sailboat, and that's how we spent our last afternoon with them. See, Stockholm is a city surrounded by water. The Venice of the North, they call it. But here the water is clear and swiftly flowing, and nearly everyone does have a boat of one sort or another. Sailing through the heart of Stockholm was a wonderful way to spend our last day there, a wonderful way to say goodbye to the landmarks that we had come to love in our short stay. But we were determined to see all that we could, and our next stop was Visby on the island of Gotland, the great trading center of Northern Europe in the Middle Ages, a fact that you'd never guess from the modern steamer that brought us there. Or the luxurious resort hotel that we stayed at, one of the most famous in all Scandinavia. And there was certainly nothing medieval about the hotel swimming pool or the lovely scenery that surrounded it. Just to be friendly, I struck up several acquaintances around the pool, but somehow that didn't impress Mary very favorably. Well, Mary's the one who always says that we should try to meet friends when we travel. Mary likes the rumba too, but she didn't seem to be in the mood for it that day. I got a kick out of this unexpected touch of the Latin so far north, but I had a feeling that Mary was a little impatient about something.
Well, there were so many other things to see at Visby. The hotel and the swimming pool were very fine, but even John had to admit that what we carried away from Visby was a sense of the past. Our tour of the island was almost like riding back into history, and of all the things we saw, I think we remembered most these skeleton arches, still tracing the beauty of a towering Gothic nave that stood there 8 centuries ago. Not quite so old, but still holding memories of the past, was this country church in Dalecarlia, the heart of Sweden, where Midsummer Night is celebrated every year as it has been since the days of the Vikings. And John was very insistent about not missing this festival.
Well, this was something I'd heard about from my family ever since I was a child. Something I'd always dreamed of seeing. You can imagine how it felt to be there at last, to see it with my own eyes, just as I'd always pictured it, only better. First, the villagers coming to church from across the lake in the traditional longboats, echoes of the ancient Viking ships. Dressed in the intricately embroidered costumes that were everyday wear for their ancestors, the women and children braided garlands of flowers for this celebration that is close in spirit to our own May Day. The sound of the fiddlers tuning up served as background for the ceremonious raising of the maypole, symbol of the Swedish Midsummer Night Festival. And finally, the moment we'd been waiting for. The fiddler struck up dance rhythms, melodies handed down from generation to generation. And though we hadn't meant to do any dancing ourselves, we ended by joining in with the rest. Frankly, after all that exercise, it was good to get onto a nice, comfortable train and rest my aching muscles. We knew that we were getting pretty far north now, and then that whistle told us that we were crossing the Arctic Circle. It was quite an occasion for both of us. We'd never been that far north before. And right on top of that, our first herd of reindeer. We were in Lapland now, and these colorful clothes were not put on for a special occasion. That was daily dress for these deer-herding nomads of the north. Mary and I were lucky enough to visit a Lapp settlement and see something of life in the northern tip of Sweden. This grass had been put out to dry and will serve as insulation in the family's boots during the winter to come. We learned that the Lapp hut is only a part-time home, for the deer must be followed in their search for grazing land. And that explains something that reminded Mary of our American Indians. This mother with her portable bassinet. This young man playing a game with his sister reminded us of an American youngster playing cowboy. But here the boy's game is also serious practice for the work that he must do when he grows older. The yearly roundup is the high point of life in Lapland, just as it is on our own western ranges. For reindeer mean everything to the Lapp: food, clothing, and livelihood. His deer herd represents his life savings. And when it comes to herding it into the corral, even the youngsters must play their part. Traveling across from Sweden to Norway, Mary and I saw the midnight sun as we'll always remember it, setting and then rising again without ever quite touching the horizon. And then that wonderful steamer trip down the Norwegian coast to Bergen. Snow-capped peaks and glaciers made us realize for the first time the magnificent variety of a Scandinavian vacation.
Of course, I had my own reasons for being excited during that trip. I knew that my Aunt Clara and Uncle Eric would be waiting for us when we landed at Bergen. We'd never seen each other, except in snapshots, but the Hansons knew us the minute we came down the gangplank, and we knew them. It seemed almost like a homecoming. Seen from the surrounding hills, Bergen is one of the most beautiful cities in the world. This is Norway's second largest city, a great seaport, where every street breathes some memory of sailing men of the past. Aunt Clara had planned a dinner party to welcome us on our first day, served, as is the custom here, at 4:30 in the afternoon. And I'm afraid that John wasn't quite prepared for all the formalities of a big Norwegian dinner.
I want to welcome formally our guests from America, to tell them how happy we are to see them at last. We have looked forward to this many years. Now, welcome to our table. Welcome till bords. Skål. 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 Skål.
John wasn't prepared for this either. But he soon got used to it.
We were a little sad to leave Bergen and the Hansons behind us, but ahead of us stretched the Hardanger Fjord, perhaps the most majestic of those twisting waterways that indent Norway's coast. Of course, we had always thought of Norway as a country of great scenery, but you can never really know what that means until you experience the silent drum that surrounds you in the heart of the fjord. To break that silence, the fjord is punctuated here and there with a thunder of falling water, plunging down over its rocky ledges. The best thing of all was to explore the fjord on our own, poking around until we discovered something wonderful and unexpected. Beneath the white snow of Hardanger's apple blossoms, we saw mountain farmers coaxing every inch of tillable ground into service. Not far from the carved steeple of a little country church, we came upon a group of brightly dressed school children rehearsing the measured steps of the region's folk dances. On the slopes of the Hardanger, we seemed to be surrounded by perpetual springtime. Every field was an invitation to stop and stay a little while.
Even in the fjord, that was the time of year for weddings, and we were invited to one of these mountain ceremonies. This wedding meant a great deal to me. My own mother had been married in just such a ceremony at a little church in the Hardanger Fjord. I even remembered her description of the elaborate headdress that's still worn by the mountain brides. And afterwards, everyone lined up for a group picture, just like the one we have in our album at home.
Mary would have been happy to spend the rest of our vacation in the Hardanger, but we'd already discovered that in Norway, every new thing is just as breathtaking as the last. So on we went, up into the snowy mountains, into ski country. Skiing was born in Norway, and nearly every Norwegian seems to have a pair of skis, whether he's a professional or just a lover of the sport out for a little fun. And with snow that never seems to melt, skiing here might almost be called a year-round activity. first night at the lodge, we saw movies of the annual winter contest at the famous Holmenkollen ski jump, an event that draws 100,000 Norwegian ski enthusiasts to witness their favorite sport. It seemed to us that those soaring bird-like flights were just as spectacular as any of the scenery that we'd witnessed in this remarkable country. Holmenkollen is the world's most famous ski jump, and naturally it was chosen as the site for the greatest sporting event of the 1952 Winter Olympic Games. Holmenkollen is situated just above Oslo Fjord, and it was from near there that we had our first bird's eye view of Oslo, set like a crown at the head of the fjord. Here in the capital, the young folk celebrated Norway's Independence Day with a spirit that reminded us a little of our own 4th of July. Young and old turn out for the parade, and the streets are filled with the wonderful sound of band music and marching feet. Everyone in Oslo takes this day off, even the Prime Minister and the royal family. When things had quieted down a little, we got a chance to see the city itself, where such striking buildings as the town hall express an adventurous spirit. A spirit as old as this Viking ship preserved in a museum. And beside a fountain in one of the city's parks, we found a present-day Viking who had substituted ingenuity for a ship of his own. Our last memory of Norway is a walk we took at sunset along Oslo's waterfront. And already our thoughts were beginning to turn to the next stage of our trip, across the water to Denmark. We knew that we hadn't seen all of Scandinavia until we'd seen Denmark's charm and gaiety. And because we'd flown Pan American, we had time for everything. To begin with, Kronborg, the famous castle at Elsinore, almost 400 years old, which Shakespeare used as the setting for his masterpiece, Hamlet. Each summer, that great drama is reenacted beneath the castle's ancient battlements by a famous international cast. From Kronborg, we traveled down to Copenhagen, where the harbor is watched over by a figure from Hans Christian Andersen's immortal legend, The Little Mermaid. Before long, we knew why Copenhagen is noted for its towers and steeples. Mary has only one word for a city like this. She just says, "Isn't it wonderful?" And of course, she's always right. Copenhagen must hold the world's record for bicycles. Even the chimney sweep travels on wheels. And after a while, we took to it ourselves. And this, incidentally, is not a firebox, as we thought at first. Well, as Mary kept insisting, it was a wonderful town. Perhaps the most alive and colorful that we'd ever seen. Copenhagen is another water-bound, sea-going city, and down by the wharves, a granite statue pays tribute to the town's paper-hatted fishwives. Out on a tour of the city, we came across a restaurant that offered, now you won't believe this, 172 different kinds of sandwiches. Chopped beef with caviar and salmon, roast pigeon with mushrooms, poached egg with lobster, salami and egg yolk, veal and cucumber salad, 172, including a simple ham on rye. Mary decided that Copenhagen is called the Paris of the North because it's such a wonderful place for shopping, and I was particularly fascinated by the signs that hung over the shops. The oculist, the barber, a seafood restaurant, the winemaker, glove maker, glass maker, hat maker, boot maker, the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker, and something for the brand new baby under the sign of the stork.
This is a land of storks, as we discovered once we got into the Danish countryside. Somehow that part of the country reminded us both of childhood, and we guessed the reason when we came upon this house with youngsters playing at the doorstep, the home of Hans Christian Andersen, Denmark's great spinner of tales for the young and the young in heart. From then on, it was like turning the pages of a beautiful, old-fashioned picture book, sailing back into a wonderful, legendary world. This part of Denmark would have been called fairy tale country, even if Andersen had never lived to make it immortal.
Denmark's bathing resorts also had something of the old world about them. Although our hotel at Fano was modern enough, before breakfast on our first morning there, we went down to the beach to discover the old-fashioned Victorian bathing machine, a sort of bathhouse on wheels. After you've changed into your suit, a fellow with a horse draws you right down into the water. A fairly bumpy ride, but Mary just couldn't resist service like that. And it was worth it in the end, as I had already discovered the water was perfect, even that early in the morning. Of course, not all of the beaches are so quiet and uncrowded. Here you'll find whatever kind of water sport you want, for the Danes love the sun and water, and Denmark's seacoast is famous for its variety. We spent the last days of our vacation touring the country's golden outer rim of beaches, and then back for a last glimpse of Copenhagen at night. The flashing lights of Tivoli Park, the gayest and most elaborate amusement park in all of Europe. We even had time for a performance at the ballet on that last wonderful night. And then something a little more lively. A toast to Scandinavia's brightness and sparkle. A toast to our Pan-American flight, and a promise to fly again to the gleaming lights of Viking Land.
Hello? Hi, sis. Yeah, I just got in. Flew Nice. Say, you ought to see me. I'm surrounded by Maloot. Yes, we flew over on the President flight by way of England, and then we flew to the continent and took some side trips to Luxembourg and Switzerland and Italy. But we spent most of the time in France and finally ended up on the Riviera. No, we flew back by the southern route from Nice, so we could see Spain and Portugal. Say, it was the best vacation I ever had. Yes, I know. Well, she did want to go back. But when it boiled itself down to a boat and 2 cuddies, or a plane was waiting. Say, sis, you ought to see those new double-decked clippers. Sleepers upstairs and a lounge as big as your living room downstairs. Interesting people? Well, I should say so. You know, we were down in the lounge just a few hours out of New York.
Oh, I'll be
Out
careful.
in the middle of the street at all.
Would you like a canapé? Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
They look good. Are you responsible? No, they're made in New York. Our steward here puts the finishing touches on them.
Oh, now you're Mr. and Mrs. James, and you're on your way to...
Paris.
Paris? You'll have lunch there tomorrow.
That's right. Isn't that wonderful? Where are we now?
Oh, we're flying at 18,000 feet now above the weather.
18,000 feet. Gosh, I wasn't conscious we were climbing at all.
Well, that's because the air pressure in the cabin is the same as at sea level.
You say we ought to transfer you to the publicity department.
I wouldn't mind, but I like flying better.
Well, that's the way it started. And before the evening was over, we'd met a half a dozen people that we know better. The steward and stewardess were certainly on their toes. Yeah. Well, you know, I was always sold on flying, but it was the sleeping that cinched the deal for Donnie. The berths are big, big as your bed. Yeah, never slept better in my life. And the next morning, there we were in Paris. Yes, here we were in Paris. A complete new life before us. Another world, another life. Donnie couldn't wait to get some pictures of the Arc de Triomphe and promptly got herself trapped in traffic. Jaywalking in Times Square is safe compared to this.
Il faut faire attention, mon Dieu, vous y voyez pas clair pour traverser une rue, comment vous faites?
Monsieur, transportez-nous à Eiffel Tower.
Je comprends pas, moi.
Eiffel Tower. Conduisons-nous à Eiffel Tower.
Oh, Colombe Van Gogh?
No. Eiffel Tower.
Oh, les petites femmes. Cabaret?
Oh, no. Eiffel Tower. Eiffel Tower.
Oh, Tourette.
Oui.
Vous pouvez pas le dire plus tôt, il y a une heure que nous sommes là, mais il faut aller manger, le monde est pas pour vous.
Mais très lentement.
Ouais, ben on verra monter toujours.
He took us for a ride, circuitous perhaps, but a wonderful preview of Paris. Down the Medicine Champs-Élysées, a mile of smart shops, cafes, and theaters. The sidewalks are nearly as broad as the avenue, and to stroll here on Sunday is one of the things to do. The Champs-Élysées runs into the Place de la Concorde, where in 1793 the guillotine took nearly 3,000 lives. Now it's a beautiful square and fountain spray where the tumbrils once rolled. But that's Paris for you, so vivacious, so resilient that unpleasantness is soon forgotten. Past the world-famous Café de la Paix on Opera Square, the heart of the city's bustle, and in the center, the Opera House itself, rich in memories, ancient and sweet. I can hardly guess what this city means to others who see it for the first time. For us, it was filled with 1,000 memories of all that Paris has meant in the human drama. The ghosts of Voltaire, Dumas, and Robespierre walk the streets, if you look for them. But no matter what you're looking for, you'll find it here. Every mood, every environment, all crammed into one bubbling city. We drove out into the Tuileries Gardens. Oh, how lovely was Paris in this month of June. The books were right. It is the most brilliant visitor city in the world. We arrived at the Palais de Chaillot, in whose broad wings are several museums, a library, and a theater. On the terrace here, Hitler strutted for the newsreels in 1940 and gazed at the Eiffel Tower just across the Seine. The tower always reminded me of something Paul Bunyan might have built with a giant erector set. The view of Paris that surpasses all others is from the top of this tower. We took the slow-moving elevator, and was it slow? We careened wildly upwards with all the reckless fury of an anemic snail. But it was fun to see the outskirts of the city slowly coming into sight as the Palais de Chaillot, which we just left, got smaller and smaller. Well, here we are at the top, almost 1,000 feet up, with the breathtaking panorama of Paris spread out below us like a beautiful abstract paint. Then back to earth again, and from a boat on the Seine, the river that threads the canvas of Paris like a sinuous ribbon, we saw the tower from another angle. Nowhere is the difference between Europe and America clearer than in the aspect of the rivers. In Europe, man has done his best to beautify them. To me, the Seine is the most vital element in the beauty of Paris, beautiful to walk across, to ride along, to fish in, to sail on, and the French have made the most of it. Everyone should take this boat trip. You not only see new things, you see old things from new angles, such as the Cathedral of Notre Dame. France was hit by a tidal wave of faith in the 12th century, and it left some of the most beautiful cathedrals that man has ever built. They say that where a man's heart is, there will his treasure be also. And these churches were clearly built by men whose whole heart was in the task. They were built not by outside contractors, but by the monks and parishioners themselves, to whom the building became a symbol of the meaning of their lives. You can look at Notre Dame from several points of view. With your artist's eye, you can marvel at the sculpture and how wonderfully it's integrated with the architecture. Or you can conjure up the famous people who've come here to pray, or be crowned, or buried, or perhaps even see the hunchback lurking behind yon gargoyle. As an artist, you will appreciate the rose windows, for no one, before or since, has ever been able to do what these men did with colors. Just across the bridge by Notre Dame on the left bank, we found the bookstalls. At one time, literary men gathered here to discuss the wit and fashionable writing of the day. But today, students and tourists seem to be the most frequent visitors. A favorite spot for relaxing is the Sidewalk Cafe. Here on the left bank, students scrape together pennies for one drink, which lets them sit there all day, talking, writing, sometimes even studying. At the flea market, you can buy anything you want, from lovely old antiques to the latest sheet music. Les Halles is called the stomach of Paris. To provide the city with enough food for a day's eating is an enormous undertaking, especially since they don't go in for packaged, canned, or frozen things the way we do. Everything must be fresh each day. Even late in the morning, Les Halles is bubbling with life. Then the small buyers come to get a sprig of parsley or a scallion for the potage or bouillabaisse or some other incomparable concoction that's given the French an international reputation for tempting the taste buds. One place to sample French food at its Epicurean best is the Tour d'Argent, one of the most famous restaurants in Paris. Celebrities from the time of Henry VIII have enjoyed the place: George Sand, Anatole France, Edmond Rostand, Sarah Bernhardt, to mention only a few. Their specialty here is pressed duck. But whatever you have, what will impress you most is the waiters. Paris is a city of waiters. French food we have in America, but French waiters we have not. Montmartre sits high on a hill overlooking Paris and is reached by a funicular railroad. Perhaps you've heard more about Montmartre than any other part of Paris. This is where Picasso and Utrillo lived, and where Toulouse-Lautrec painted Demi-Mondaines. Don't expect to find a patches and vice dens. It's a charming, folksy place with narrow streets, jumbled old facades that lean crazily out over the pavements, and cabarets filled with music and song, mostly furnished by the patrons. The building that dominates the whole beauty of Montmartre is a church, the Sacred Heart Cathedral. You see it up every little street you look, and to me it has a subduing influence on anyone too strongly pleasure-bent. No, Montmartre is no more wicked than Greenwich Village in New York, and I must admit we were a bit disappointed not to see even one absinthe drinker.
But Donnie loved the quaint little shops and advises a daytime as well as a nighttime visit. Near the cathedral, we met some friendly art students. Who knows, in their voluble midst may dwell the Cézanne or the Matisse of the day after tomorrow.
He only speaks French. He's one of our French friends. He doesn't...
Yes.
How do you?
Hello.
Mademoiselle,
Mademoiselle, what do you do?
I'm a musician, a pianist.
Oh, she's really a model.
Oh, no.
Oh, nice.
Mais alors, qu'est-ce que vous faites comme travail?
Décorateur. Mais n'ayant pas toujours de travail, je travaille comme ouvrier chez un entrepreneur.
Boulot.
What did he say?
Well, he doesn't do decoration. He works for the builder.
Oh, I see. To eat. To eat. Oh.
Eat, did he say? That's for me. I was always thinking of eating in Paris. So I arranged to meet Donnie at the Moulin de la Galette, that famous old mill that dates back to the 7th century. While we ate, we listened to a charming song about Paris in the spring.
Paris a la douceur d'un bouquet de violettes, il n'est rien de plus beau qu'un printemps qui revient. Pas de plus beau printemps qu'un printemps parisien. Printemps de Paris.
Springtime in Paris, in the Tuileries, green lawns fresh with dew, riot of color. In the flower market, symphony of blue and rose. Springtime in Paris, pastels mixed with gray, soft light in the twilight, and all the lovers walk on the Seine in the sunset.
Ah la la la, fleurissez-vous de lilas. Gai, 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 fleurissez-vous de muguet. Printemps de Paris.
Springtime in Paris. Face powder perfumes the Champs-Élysées. In the Luxembourg Gardens, the words of forever on lips intoxicated with love.
Fleurissez-vous de lilas. Gai, 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 fleurissez-vous de muguet.
If you told me I could bring back one custom from France and only one, I'd choose sidewalk cafes. It's such a pleasant place to meet your friends and watch the passing parade. We have nothing to compare with it, unless you count the corner drugstore. What a contrast. Donnie had picked up a map on the Pan American plane and was all excited about visiting the Chateau country. So, the next morning, we took one of those wonderful Swedish buses and started out. These Swedish buses were as fine as anything I'd ever seen. We took our last look at the city, so charming, so unravaged, and bore away a memory that will remain with us always as part of our life's unalterable good. Our first stop was at the Chateau of Versailles, about 20 miles out of Paris, probably the most regal of all royal edifices in the world. To really appreciate the place, one should have studied a little French history. Versailles has been the scene of some of the most colorful and some of the most tragic events of the past 300 years. Louis XIV created Versailles out of nothing, not only to show what a great king could do and how he should live, but to provide a setting so magnificent, so dazzling, that no Frenchman of consequence could afford to stay away from it. As many as 10,000 people have been housed and fed here at one time. Not to be at court in those days meant either that you were a person of no consequence or that you had incurred the royal wrath. The gardens were the background for innumerable spectacles. There are rockeries and colonnades and fountains. You come on them unexpectedly, and some are incredibly beautiful, like this sunken garden with a waterfall made of shells. It must have been the scene of ballets and picnics and all sorts of happy times. We were a little sorry we hadn't lived in those days. must come again for the interiors, for Versailles is so extensive that a whole afternoon is hardly enough to see the gardens alone. Before the time of Louis XIV, the valley of the Loire was the heart of the French monarchy. The great chateaux still stand today like the tombstones of a glory that has vanished. They dot the banks of the river within easy riding distance of each other. There's Amboise, where Leonardo da Vinci is buried. And here's the chateau at Blois, one of the most beautiful of the old royal residences. Like most, it started as a fortress. Then Louis XII built this wing in the 15th century Gothic style. There's Louis in stone over the portal. The place is full of memories. This is where Francois Villon composed verses with his fellow poet Charles d'Orléans, and where Catherine de' Medici ended her terrible life. When you cross the threshold, you step right into the brilliant movement of the French Renaissance, the period that produced most of the great chateaux. One of its finest achievements was this superb spiral staircase built by Francis I. Not far away is one of the best examples of the charm of the French Renaissance architecture, the delightful chateau of Azay-le-Rideau. It's just the sort of place you imagine Sleeping Beauty slept in. And Balzac really did sleep here often, so they told us. A short drive away is Chenonceau, the chateau Henry II gave to his sweetheart Diane de Poitiers. Catherine de' Medici, always jealous of Diane, forced her to give up Chenonceau when Henry died. When she took over, she topped the bridge with this elaborate gallery, and also threw some parties that topped the orgies of Nero. Chambord was built by Francis I because he liked to hunt hereabouts. What a hunting lodge! 375 rooms to hang your trophies in. In the same section is Villandry, famed for its beautiful 16th century gardens. As we counted the places we'd seen, we realized the value of pilgrimages. No amount of reading or study can produce the same effect on the spirit as actually seeing these places, realizing that they are really there, much the same as they were when Rabelais saw them. Everyone should come to the chateau country, and with plenty of time to wander over the region slowly. It's a profound experience, and its joy will remain with you as long as you live. The region around Bordeaux produces the finest wines in the world, and has since Roman times. The culture of grapes has, through the centuries, developed into a fine art, and every step from pruning to spraying has a special technique. If you like places that haven't been overrun by tourists, here's your spot. You'll find not only good wine, but superb food. Almost every man in Bordeaux is a connoisseur of food and drink, and the chef of a charming restaurant told us that good wine pleases all four senses, lovely to look at, to smell, to taste, and it even sings. And then to the walled city of Carcassonne. What a spot. You'd never believe it existed unless you'd seen it. Carcassonne was built first by the Romans, and during its turbulent history passed through many hands, each one leaving his additions to the fortifications. When, in the 13th century, it passed to the French crown, the fortress was so strengthened it became impregnable. What makes it unique is that it is in a wonderful state of preservation, and many people still live within its walls, where there is an excellent hotel and a beautiful Gothic church. Not one, but two walls of masonry surround the whole affair. The drawbridge is just as it was 1,000 years ago. But the inhabitants don't pull it up and down now, since the only marauding forces these days are tourists, who are comparatively harmless. From the battlements, you can see the new town of Carcassonne, which lies at the base of the fortress. One last admonition. Be sure to see Carcassonne by moonlight, for it is then that the ghosts of the past rise around you. and you may hear the distant scream of a dying attacker or the gay tinkling laughter of ladies in waiting. But apart from that, Carcassonne by moonlight is one of the most unforgettably beautiful sights you will ever have the opportunity to see. I've been enthusiastic about so much in France that I sound like a travel folder, but truthfully, we felt that way about it. And the Riviera, I had no idea it was so beautiful or so extensive. I thought it was a small resort for the idle rich. Actually, the Riviera stretches for some 200 miles along the coast of the Mediterranean, and there's every kind of scenery and every kind of town and village to fit every kind of budget. Nice, brisk and modern, gay and carefree, is the biggest city on the Riviera and a proper place for just being lazy and dreamy and unconscious of time. We spent a day at Cannes basking in the sun and wondering how we ever got the idea that the Riviera was either exclusive or expensive. For every duke or prince or nabob, there are hundreds of people like us who come with their families just to bask in the sun. We spent another day touring around, gasping at the scenery. At Juan-les-Pins, we ate and drank and danced and swam and ate and drank and danced and swam and in between watched other people do the same. Did you ever try water jousting? It's a popular sport in France. If I hadn't seen this with my own eyes, I wouldn't have believed it. Imagine tent villages on the Riviera. And all these years I've been afraid to show my face here because my income was definitely not in the upper brackets. For those who like water sports, this is an ideal spot because the Mediterranean is usually as smooth as glass. Furthermore, there's such splendid scenery. At least I thought so. Donnie suggested rather pointedly that water skiing was not purely a spectator sport, and why didn't I stop looking and start skiing? Well, I did. And nobody was more surprised than I to discover that it was really quite easy. After a few hours of practice, I found I could do just as well as the experts. On the 14th of July, like our 4th, there was much music and dance and fireworks and a parade in native costume of people who had come from miles around for the folk festival. We saw L'Alaisiennes do a charming maypole dance. Dancers from Auvergne had plenty of spirit. the costumes of the dancers from Brittany were as interesting as the dance. And from the Pyrenees, the gaiety of the Basques was contagious. Started to all sorts of pretexts for spinning out our stick, but finally our excuses ran out. We joined for the last time in one of those spontaneous bits of merrymaking that are so characteristic of the French. We left a little of our hearts behind, but we took away a memory. We had had a happy time in France, and we knew that we would be happy 20 years hence in the memory of it.
Pan American World Airways system, with its fleet of double-decked clippers, offers the pilgrims to Rome this holy year of 1950 speedy, comfortable circle cruises to the capital of the Catholic world and to other great Catholic shrines of Europe. Several times each day, giant clippers will taxi from the air terminal at New York with travelers bound for the Eternal City. They will circle the skyscrapers of Manhattan to give you a final glimpse of the greatest city in the New World, and then head eastward toward the greatest city of the ancient one. Even if you can allow yourself only a few weeks, you will be able to share the blessings of this holy year. For Europe is but a day from the United States by air. Regardless of the season, your crossing will be smooth. For clippers cruise in the upper air far above the weather. The lower deck lounge offers you a chance to stretch your legs by going downstairs 20,000 feet above the sea at 300 miles an hour. You'll spend less time traveling and more time in Rome and the rest of Europe when you go by Clipper. This holy year of 1950, all roads lead to Rome. Air roads flown by Pan American Airways system lead from all over the world. Pan American offers from North America 2 routes to Europe. You may go one way and return the other at no extra cost, and visit more countries during your trip. One service is to Ireland, London, Brussels, Frankfurt, Prague, and Vienna. The other via Lisbon, for the shrine of Our Lady of Fatima, to Barcelona for the shrine of Montserrat, and to Marseille for the miraculous shrine of Lourdes. The shrine of Lourdes is tucked away in the foothills of the French Pyrenees, where Bernadette Soubirous saw the Holy Virgin. The shrine, which rises on the hill where she played as a child, is visited each year by more than 1 million pilgrims who come from all over the world. So constantly are miracles performed at Lourdes that for more than 100 years the sick and the lame have been brought to the grotto where the Blessed Virgin Mary appeared. Before this sacred spot, where so many prayers have been answered, the pious and hopeful ask for divine help. crutches and braces left behind bear testimony to the everlasting miracles of the shrine of Our Lady of Lourdes. Every 25 years, the Catholic Church celebrates a holy year in the sacred city of Rome. For more than 6 centuries, untold millions of devout Catholics have journeyed to the eternal city on the banks of the Tiber to receive the Holy Year indulgence. Those who will make the pilgrimage this year will see many wonderful sights. We trust that a brief preview of some of the great things of Rome will add to your coming journey. The bridge and tomb of the Emperor Hadrian has been one of the outstanding landmarks of Rome for 1,800 years. The massive round structure, which has often served as a fortress during the centuries, has been called the Castle of St. Angelo since Pope Gregory the Great saw the Archangel Michael sheath his sword above it after the plague of the 6th century. The Colosseum is one of the antiquities familiar to every school child throughout the world. The huge amphitheater held 50,000 spectators, where during 5 centuries, gladiators met in mortal combat. Wild beasts killed each other or fought humans. Even naval battles were staged in the flooded arena, and before bloodthirsty and cheering mobs, Christian martyrs were thrown to hungry lions. From the Colosseum, you can look into the Roman Forum. In primitive times, a marketplace for the tribes that occupied the surrounding hills. When Rome was founded, this place gradually became the commercial and political center of the city. As Rome grew, the Forum grew. Marble temples and palaces were built. Imperial monuments were constructed, and the area enlarged until, in time, it became the most magnificent spot in the Roman Empire. As the empire fell apart, neglect and decay turned it into a crumbling ruin. During the Middle Ages, churches were constructed from some of the fallen stones. The others became overgrown and forgotten. Only in the last century were excavations begun to uncover and re-erect monuments which, if they could speak, could tell the very story of the rise and fall of the Roman Empire. There are other fora in Rome, ones built by emperors for their own use. That of Trajan is well preserved, his columns showing hardly a trace of the passing of centuries. The largest and best preserved of Roman arches is that of the Emperor Constantine. It was erected after the triumph of Constantine, when he gave legal status and protection to the church. Once during your stay, you will climb the Capitoline Hill. Here are the fine buildings of the Capitoline Museum with the oldest art collection in the world, the twin gods Castor and Pollux. And in the center of the square, the ancient bronze statue of Marcus Aurelius, one of the best of Roman emperors. Not far from where he rides his once golden steed are the infant-figured Romulus and Remus, and the legendary nurse that saved them to found Rome. Part of the Capitoline Hill is occupied by the monument of Victor Emmanuel, under whom the unity of Italy was achieved. The unknown soldier of Italy's First World War is placed here, his guard of honor almost as still as the figures in stone above them. Fine views of Rome await you when you climb the monument. In front of you is the Piazza Venezia, with recollections of a dictator. And beyond, the heart of modern Rome. From the piazza leads the Corso, a narrow but important business and financial thoroughfare of the city. Buses have replaced the trolley cars of other times. Motor scooters are the latest innovation in the traffic of the Eternal City, traffic that is so well directed by the white-sleeved police. At busy hours, pedestrians compete with vehicles for right-of-way in the narrower streets, or dodge in and out past the awnings that almost hide some of the sidewalks. Even in modern Rome, you will see monuments of imperial times. Favorite souvenirs of Roman conquerors must have been Egyptian obelisks, for there are many throughout the city. The Tritone fountain in the Piazza Barberini will be a familiar sight to many visitors, for nearby are most of the hotels of the city. You may be surprised when you see how many splendid buildings and fine avenues there are in Rome, for the city has grown greatly since the last Holy Year. The Quirinale Tunnel speeds up traffic downtown. But traffic is not all fast-moving, however, for the cabbie still holds his own in modern Rome. In the beginning of the 4th century, churches began to replace temples in Rome. After the downfall of the empire, Christianity survived, and through it the Eternal City rose again. Slowly but firmly, its influence growing and spreading, until today, its spiritual leadership is felt throughout the entire world. The oldest church of Rome is the Pantheon, built 27 years before the birth of Christ as a temple to many gods. It was converted 600 years later to Christianity. Inside, its only illumination comes through an opening in the Great Dome. Holy Year. These words reach every nation in the world. They carry an invitation to come on pilgrimage to Rome. During Holy Year, pilgrims of different tongues, races, and customs, like untold millions before them, will come to Rome from all over the world. When you are in Rome, you'll see many processions, both simple and elaborate. And you may participate on a particular feast day in a ceremony at one of the 400 historic churches in this ancient capital of the Church Universal. To gain the indulgence of the Holy Year, every pilgrim must visit on the same day the 4 patriarchal basilicas of St. Peter's, St. John Lateran, St. Paul's outside the walls, and Santa Maria Maggiore. These are the ranking churches of the Holy City. Close beside the ancient walls of Rome is St. John Lateran, the Cathedral of Rome, the first great gift of the Emperor Constantine. As you look upon the noble facade surmounted by statues of saints, remember that this church preserves some of the holiest relics of Christianity. The little table used by St. Peter as his first altar, the heads of St. Peter and St. Paul, and the table at which Christ and his disciples sat for the Last Supper. Under the portico is one of the 4 sacred doors of Rome, which are opened on Christmas Eve with the great ceremony that is the beginning of Holy Year. Santa Maria Maggiore on the Esquiline Hill is the largest of the churches built to the Virgin Mary. She herself indicated the spot where her church should be built by appearing to the bishop one hot summer night, saying that where snow would fall that night in Rome, there should he build. and snow fell that night in the year 352 on the Esquiline. Within, among its sacred relics, is the first cradle of Jesus, that in which the infant Savior was carried on the flight into Egypt. The holy door will be opened this year, and you may pass through it when you enter the noble basilica. A little distance outside the walls of the city is St. Paul's. This, one of the most beautiful and best beloved, is, after St. Peter's, the largest church of Rome. It is the second patriarchal church where, since the Jubilee of 1300, pilgrims have been required to worship. Constantine ordered a small basilica built over the tomb of St. Paul, who was beheaded nearby, and had the body of the apostle placed in a casket of solid bronze. Emperor Theodosius constructed an even greater basilica, which stood until 1823, when it was destroyed by fire. From all over the world, gifts poured in to help rebuild the beloved church. And within 30 years, the modern duplicate of the ancient basilica was completed. Since the day of his death, the emblem of St. Paul has been the sword, the weapon of his execution and martyrdom. The holy door, which was spared by the fire, is the one that has stood since the days of the Emperor Theodosius. We have seen 3 of the patriarchal churches every pilgrim must visit, and have had glimpses of the great city where they are, saving for the last a more leisurely visit to the greatest church of Christendom, St. Peter's. The huge dome, built by Michelangelo, is seen from all over Rome. Its proportions so graceful and light that it appears almost as if floating above the city. St. Peter's was erected over the hallowed grave of the first vicar of Christ. The Emperor Constantine was present 1,600 years ago when the church was begun, and himself dug the first 12 baskets of soil, one for each of the apostles. When you stand in the great square, you will be drawn toward one of the 2 beautiful fountains backed by the superb colonnade. As you watch the play of water, recall bits of the history of this hallowed place. It was once an arena where the mad Emperor Nero delighted in torturing thousands of early Christians. St. Peter was crucified here, head downward. The church which Constantine built above the apostles' grave stood 1,100 years before its walls began to weaken and it was taken down. More than 100 years were needed to construct this great basilica, the largest place of worship on earth. You will want to stand on the spot in St. Peter's Square where the 4 rows of columns appear as a single row. Step a few feet away and see the difference. You will see the ancient Egyptian obelisk in the center of the square. Beyond is the Vatican Palace, the residence of the Holy Father. Vatican City is an independent state under the sovereignty of the Pope. Swiss guards dressed in the picturesque uniforms designed by Michelangelo stand guard over the small material state created in 1929 by the Lateran Treaty between the Holy See and the Kingdom of Italy. You will want to climb to the top of the dome, where you can look down on Rome and the entire Vatican City. To the left of the great square, you will see the roof of the Vatican Palace, the galleries with their priceless collections, the Sistine Chapel. Fine buildings house the Vatican state offices. Lush green gardens occupy much of the hill of the Vatican. From Radio Vatican, the voice of the Holy Father is heard round the world. It is in these beautiful gardens that the popes rested and meditated. Through this covered walkway, the Holy Father takes his daily walks, sheltered when the sun is hot, protected when it rains. Lovely flowers embellish the gardens, and when you are privileged to stroll through them, you will catch many attractive glimpses of St. Peter's great dome. Beneath this dome are the mortal remains of the first vicar of Christ. Thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church. This holy year of 1950 will witness many processions and ceremonies within this great basilica. Millions of faithful pilgrims from all over the world will congregate here. New saints will be canonized. You too will want to join these pilgrims to the holy city to receive the blessings of the Holy Father and earn the Jubilee indulgence, the reward that comes to those who fulfill the requirements of the holy year in the eternal city.